Hello, and welcome to the Literate Ghost. My name is Randall, and my hobby is collecting classic ghost stories. I know, I know, some of you are thinking, he uploaded this video in the middle of January, and he still has his Christmas tree up. Well, it's true. I plead guilty, but with extenuating circumstances. I don't know where you happen to live, but here in the northeastern United States, Christmas is just the tip of the winter iceberg. There are still months of snow, gray cloudy skies, and icy roads yet to come. And snow. Did I mention snow? For weeks and weeks and weeks. So you can't really blame a guy for trying to hold on to that Christmas magic for just a little bit longer. But before I put away the last of my Christmas decorations for the year, I would like to talk about one of the difficulties that I have with one of my favorite Christmas ghost stories. And yes, for the uninitiated, the traditional time for telling classic ghost stories is Christmas time, especially Christmas Eve. But I digress. The story I have in mind is called Smee by English author A.M. Burrage. It's a wonderfully creepy little tale. It takes place on Christmas Eve, and it's quite short, so it's perfect for telling aloud to a captive audience. It's also readily available, having been reprinted in numerous anthologies, converted to digital formats, and of course, spread far and wide over the internet on countless ghost story websites, podcasts, and YouTube audio recordings. It sounds like a perfect story to tell in front of a fire on a dark, cold Christmas evening. So what could possibly be the problem here? Well, as it turns out, quite a bit, if you're concerned with reading the story as its author intended. Today I'd like to talk about the trouble with Smee. Smee tells the tale of a young man attending a Christmas Eve celebration at an English country house, as he relates his horrifying reason for being unwilling to play a game of hide and seek. The story was first published in the December 1929 edition of Nash's Pall Mall magazine by author A.M. Burrage under the pseudonym X Private X. And although I am no expert in copyright law, I can tell you that that date causes some problems, as this story is not yet in the public domain, at least not at the time of this recording and not in the United States. So, remember my mentioning that Smee was readily available online? Are all of these sites and YouTube channels getting permission from the author's estate, or are they simply ignoring copyright law? Well, in some cases that may be true, but in other cases there's another, more complicated wrinkle. You see, there are multiple versions of the story available online, and many of them are not the story as written by the original author. The trouble all began with good intentions, of course, and we all know what road is paved with those and where it leads. Back in 1989, the Oxford University Press began publishing a series of books called the Oxford Bookworms Library. These books were created for the purpose of teaching English to mostly non-native speakers. They used existing popular stories and rewrote them to make them more useful for educational purposes. The library was arranged in education levels or stages, and stage 5 of the series included a section on ghost stories. Some of these books were made available in digital format to be used in various educational courses, and some of these digital editions were then uploaded onto the internet to be made available for the students' use. They then escaped into the ether, where they have mutated ever since. Some fly-by-night publishers of ebooks have gotten a hold of them and made certain modifications here and there. So you will often find a mishmash of some of the modified version and some of the original version. When looking for a copy of this story, the source matters greatly. To begin with, there are reliable sources, and then there are not-so-reliable sources. The original version will almost always be found in hardbound anthologies from reputable publishers. If they do include the modified version, they will almost certainly label it as such. These can usually be found in your local library or bookstore. Digital editions and softcover editions can be found online, the most reliable being those published by, unsurprisingly, Burrage Publishing. You can find a digital copy of Smee and Other Stories for under $2. Online elsewhere, some digital versions can be made available through local libraries. Just make sure that they don't credit anyone other than Burrage as the author. As for less reliable sources, most random ghost story websites, blogs, podcasts, audiobooks, YouTube recordings, an unfortunately large number of these use the modified versions. And lastly, bargain basement ghost story collections. You've probably seen these 2 million stories for $1. My advice is save your dollar. These editions are full of garbage, unfortunately. They usually just scrape stories from the internet and compile them without any editorial intervention whatsoever. You are almost guaranteed to get a knockoff version with these things. So, how do you know if you're reading the original? And does it really matter? For the first question, I have a number of solutions. As to the latter, well, I'll try to point out some of the major discrepancies between the modified version and the original and let you decide for yourself. The original has several passages that involve adult activities, such as preparing and consuming alcoholic beverages, reference to whiskey and smoking cigars. Words such as smoking room have been converted to breakfast room, and so on. Language and practices that are not widely known outside of England, such as particularly English words, phrases, and customs, are often removed. Unfortunately, long or complex words and sentences are often reworded or removed entirely. I'll show you some examples. The passage, "She broke her neck at the bottom of the stairs," becomes, "She broke her neck, of course." Or, "It's a great improvement on the ordinary game of hide and seek." The name derives from the ungrammatical colloquialism, "It's me." This becomes, "It's much better than hide and seek." The name comes from "It's me, of course." Or this passage, "It spoiled my nerve quite a while, and I can't afford to take long holidays. Besides, it saves a lot of trouble and inconvenience to own up at once to being a coward." This somehow becomes the following: "It made me quite nervous for a long time. I prefer to pay my forfeit at once." We all stared at him. His words did not make sense at all. This is followed by yet another strange language conversion. "Tim Vouchy, the best of hosts, smiled around at us, and in that smile there was a meaning which is sometimes vulgarly expressed by the slow closing of an eye. There's a story coming," he announced. This manages to transmogrify into, "Tim Vouchy was the kindest man in the world. He smiled at us all." This is only a few examples pulled from the first page or so of the story. There are many many more, some of which are more egregious than others. As you can probably tell by now, the modified version is considerably shorter than the original, and while the bones of the story are mostly intact, the language, the style, and the flow of the story have been completely altered, in my opinion. So, ultimately, if you don't mind reading or listening to a heavily modified version of Smee, you can find it almost anywhere. But if you prefer the original, as it was intended by its author, you can probably find it in your local library or bookstore or online for a small fee. Or you can just wait a few more years until the original falls into the public domain, which may actually make things even more confusing. Well, now it is time for me to put away my Christmas tree. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.